5 friends. One cold January night and a disappearance that turned a quiet Oregon town into the center of a chilling enigma. Their SUV was discovered, engine running, no damage, no tracks in the snow. Then came the bodies. All but one, and when the last survivor was found, alive but frozen in time, the truth proved far more twisted than anyone feared. What really happened in Valemont Ridge? It was supposed to be a regular Friday night, the kind where 5 friends pile into an old SUV, loud with laughter and leftover adrenaline from cheering a high school championship. Caleb Martin, 27, sat in the driver's seat, his fingers tapping the steering wheel to a beat only he could hear. Behind him, Riley Monroe and Jonas Liu cracked open a bag of popcorn, still replaying the Buzzbrick school chapter, bobbing off at seals bobbing with each bump in the road. Eli Thatcher sat beside Caleb, staring out the window, unusually quiet. The air in the car smelled of processed cheese from gas station nachos and the faint musk of wet jackets. The windshield wipers swept at light drizzle as they exited the Valemont Stadium parking lot at precisely 9:32 p.m. Caleb cracked a window for some air and said, "All right, gents, Homer burgers," just as Jonas added, "as long as it's not that one place with the sketchy ketchup." Laughter rolled through the vehicle, but 3 blocks away from the stadium, something shifted. Caleb glanced into his rearview mirror and frowned. A black pickup truck was following too closely, its headlights unusually bright and unwavering. "That guy's got some nerve," Caleb muttered. Eli finally spoke. "He's been there since we left the parking lot." His voice was calm, but everyone caught the edge in it. They took a right onto Hollow Creek Road, a detour Caleb preferred, less traffic, and a shortcut to the 82 freeway. The truck followed. Caleb slowed. The truck slowed. He changed lanes. So did it. The chatter inside the SUV died. "Okay, what's this guy's problem?" Riley asked, sitting up. Caleb tapped his brakes, then made an impulsive left into a well-lit gas station, Rogers Fuel and Mart. The SUV coasted into the lot under fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered. The pickup slowed at the entrance, then kept driving. Caleb exhaled. "Psycho," he murmured, trying to laugh it off. Eli didn't. His eyes stayed locked on the side mirror, watching the truck disappear into the night. They filed into the convenience store, their voices echoing between shelves of neon snacks and discount energy drinks. Jonas went for candy bars, Riley hunted for beef jerky, Caleb headed to the back for bottled water. The clerk, a thin guy with a red beanie, barely looked up from his newspaper. At 9:51 p.m., the store's security cameras abruptly cut out. Not one angle caught how or why. They blinked back online at 10:01 p.m., just as the SUV was pulling away from the lot. That 10-minute void became the last official sighting of the group together. Outside, drizzle turned into a fine mist. Caleb started the engine. Derek, now more alert, noticed something. "Did you guys hear that?" "What?" Jonas asked. "A knock, like metal against metal." "Dude, you were asleep." "No, seriously." Derek looked around the lot nervously. "It was like someone tapped the car door." They laughed, but Caleb scanned the area one last time. Empty. He shifted into gear and drove off, unaware that none of the nearby traffic cams had picked up their license plate after they left the station. Hours later, Riley's mom would report him missing when he didn't return by midnight. Jonas's sister would try calling, only to hear his phone ring and go to voicemail. By morning, all 5 would be considered officially missing. And it all began here, on Hollow Creek Road, in a gas station with a 10-minute gap and a truck that never should have been there. 3 days after the boys vanished, the first major lead came not from a search party or the police, but from a forest maintenance worker named Omar Reyes, who had been clearing debris off Route 16, a narrow winding trail that wrapped around Valemont Ridge like a broken ribbon. At 7:42 a.m., he radioed dispatch to report an abandoned vehicle that was partially lodged against a ridge of jagged stone, its hazard lights blinking silently into the morning mist. "It's still running," Omar said, breath fogging in the cold air. "Engine's on, but no one's inside." Within the hour, deputies from Valemont County Sheriff's Department arrived, boots crunching against gravel and frostbitten soil. The vehicle was identified immediately, Caleb Martin's black 2002 Chevrolet Trailblazer, license plate matching the missing persons report, filed just 36 hours earlier. The engine hummed softly. The radio was on, playing low static. On the passenger seat sat an unopened water bottle, half a bag of candy, and a printed map of the area. No blood, no broken glass, no visible damage. But also no keys in the ignition. More puzzling than that, there were no footprints, not in the dirt, not in the snow-dusted shoulder beside the car. The area surrounding the vehicle was undisturbed, as if the SUV had materialized out of thin air and settled against the rocks by some invisible force. "Where the hell are the tire tracks?" Deputy Miles Graves muttered, crouching to examine the undercarriage. "They didn't drive here. It's like they—" His partner, Sheriff's Tech Officer Callie Rook, scanned the area with a thermal sensor. No signs of recent human heat signatures, no animals nearby, just the cold pulse of a running vehicle and 5 empty seats. The back of the SUV had a few items scattered, 2 jackets, a smashed phone, later confirmed, and 1 shoe. Just 1. Caleb's size, worn down at the heel. Back at the station, forensic mechanics ran tests on the vehicle. The first red flag appeared within hours. The brake line was intentionally rerouted, not cut, but subtly looped and clamped to delay response during heavy braking. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing. "It wouldn't fail immediately," said lead mechanic Shauna Barrett. "It would give out when someone was forced to stop hard, like on a sharp mountain turn," which raised a chilling question. Were the boys lured onto this road knowing the car would become inoperable? Or had they simply driven into a trap? Detectives combed the surrounding wilderness, deploying drones and canine units, yet after 3 full days, the area remained mute. No trace of struggle, no bodies, no discarded phones. Not even a scrap of torn fabric. The location was remote, more than 20 miles from any logical route between the stadium and a friend's home in Millen Creek. "They had no reason to be out here," said Special Investigator Natalie Kerr, reviewing GPS history. "This wasn't even on their known travel patterns, and yet, this is where the trail ends, or begins." Public attention surged. News vans parked along the shoulder. Reporters filmed segments with the looming trees of Valemont Ridge in the background. 5 friends vanished without a trace, they repeated, eyes locked on cameras, trying to sound composed while standing feet away from a vehicle that had driven itself into national mystery. Social media exploded with theories. Some claimed alien abduction. Others referenced a serial killer known in Oregon during the late 1980s. A few believed it was all staged, an elaborate disappearance orchestrated for attention. None of them were right. In the sheriff's office conference room, the mood was somber. The parents had arrived, Caleb's father, Eli's sister, Derek's aunt. They sat in silence, staring at blown-up photos of the SUV's final position. When shown the rerouted brake lines, Caleb's father, a former mechanic himself, turned pale. "He wouldn't have noticed," he whispered. "He trusted that car like family." Meanwhile, a local informant stepped forward. A ranger named Beckwith, who managed trail maintenance up the mountain's western slope, claimed he had seen a black pickup truck parked about a mile from where the SUV was found 2 nights prior. "Didn't think much of it, just parked there, engine running. When I doubled back an hour later, it was gone." Beckwith was known to be reliable, but his testimony added another twist. If the truck was there before the trailblazers showed up, was it waiting? One of the deputies hiked 3 miles along a deer trail northwest of the site. At the edge of a small clearing, he found something strange, an old flare gun, half buried in moss. Inside the handle was a scrap of cloth, soaked in a dark, crusted substance that later tested as human blood. No match in the database, no prints. Another dead end, or was it back at the site? Drone footage finally caught something on infrared, a faint heat signature deep in the ravine near an outcropping of rocks. A team was dispatched at dawn. The climb was brutal. What they found wasn't a person, but a backpack. Inside a journal belonging to Jonas Liu. The last entry was dated the night of the game. It ended mid-sentence. "We saw the truck again tonight. This time, the journal entry found in Jonas Liu's backpack haunted investigators. We saw the truck again tonight. This time it—" and then nothing. No further pages, no explanations, just a blank space where words should have been, like someone or something had interrupted him. The backpack itself had been weather-beaten, but oddly intact. Inside, apart from the journal, was a broken pen, a torn photograph of the group at the basketball game, and something folded tightly between two waterlogged books. A map. The paper was yellowed and creased from frequent handling, with its corners curling, ink smudged in places, but even through the damage, a specific point was circled in red ink. It was labeled Shelter. No legend, no trails marked, just a rough grid overlaying what used to be a government training zone decades ago, long since restricted. The coordinates were estimated to be 18 miles northwest from where Caleb's vehicle had been discovered. The area around the mark was part of an old decommissioned military reserve called Ridgefield Strategic Division Grounds, abandoned in the late 70s after a radiation leak scandal shut it down. Most locals called it the Green Zone, but not because of vegetation, because no one ever went there, not willingly. The land was closed off by barbed wire fences, rusted signs warning against trespassing, and stories of strange activity, lights in the trees, unnatural sounds at night, and disappearances the town never liked talking about. That map changed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't just a case of a group getting lost. It looked like they were headed somewhere, or perhaps being guided. 2 days after the map was submitted for analysis, a man named Leonard Briggs came forward after seeing the case report on television. He was a retired biology teacher from Pendleton and an amateur astronomer who often camped in the Valemont Ridge region to stargaze. On the night of January 15th, 3 days after the group vanished, Leonard had been in a clearing just off Cragstone Bend, 6 miles from the SUV's location. Around 2:05 a.m., while adjusting his telescope, he heard a high-pitched scream, sharp, abrupt, and unmistakably human. Then came frantic pounding. He swore it sounded like fists hitting metal. His tent, parked near his Jeep, shook slightly, as if from a distant vibration. "At first I thought it was a cougar or something banging against an old barrel," he told detectives. But the rhythm, it was like someone was trying to be hurt. Leonard had been in the woods long enough to know better than to investigate sounds like that alone in the dark. He'd locked his Jeep doors, turned off his flashlight, and waited it out until dawn. But what lingered in his mind wasn't the scream, it was the silence that followed. Too still, too sudden, like the forest itself had been holding its breath. At the time, he told no one. Strange things in the woods weren't unusual stories, and he'd long ago learned that sharing those only got you sideways looks. But when he saw Caleb's SUV on the news and learned where it had been found, the memory hit him like a cold slap. He drew a rough map from memory and matched his GPS logs. The location of the sounds, roughly 5 miles east of the red circle on Jonas's map. Investigators pushed deeper. A search unit with clearance was sent toward the direction marked Shelter, using the rough mapping and Leonard's report as a guide. The journey was slow, hindered by icy slopes, collapsed paths, and dense underbrush. On the 3rd day of the trek, about 12 miles in, the team encountered remnants of a fence, rusted barbed wire tangled with vines, and a faded sign that barely clung to a metal pole. RSD compound sign. Below the letters was a patch where a seal used to be, scraped away like someone didn't want it to be identified. One of the agents noted it looked like someone had deliberately attempted to make the area seem older than it was. Sections of fencing were too recently disturbed, some vegetation cleared by blade nut hoof or paw. They followed a path lined with embedded stones, almost like a trail once paved. At one point, they discovered what seemed to be an old service road underfoot, long since overtaken by moss and frost. Then came the first major discovery, a buried box. It had been tucked beneath rocks, secured by a camouflage tarp. Inside was a flare gun, a worn emergency radio, and a laminated ID badge. Jonas Liu. The badge had been bent, snapped in two, and the photo smudged with something reddish-brown. Forensics later confirmed it was blood, type A, matching Jonas's file. The radio was inoperable, its circuits clearly fried. The flare gun, however, had one flare left. It was unclear if Jonas had used the others or never had the chance. While waiting for clearance to move deeper into the green zone, the team reviewed satellite data. Oddly, the area showed no overhead imagery, more recent than 1991. Attempts to retrieve newer satellite data from public archives returned classified errors. One of the analysts noted that the zone, while officially closed, was still occasionally registered under Department of Defense weather equipment calibrations, meaning something out there still warranted attention. Or secrecy. That night, one of the search team's trail cams picked up something strange. A faint light, not a flare, moving through the woods just west of their base camp. It pulsed rhythmically, 3 short bursts, pause, 2 long. Morse code? A ranger, Thomas Langley, tried to replicate it by shining a flashlight into the trees. He received no response. The next morning, the team found a strange object outside their camp, a cloth bracelet, handmade, with 5 knots. They matched photos taken from Jonas's social media. The bracelet had belonged to Riley. As they prepared to move out toward the circled location, snow began falling heavier. Communication with base command grew intermittent. The group pressed on regardless, following the crude trails left by something or someone recently disturbing the terrain. What they didn't know yet was that Shelter Cat wasn't the only thing hidden in those woods. There was something else watching. As the search team moved deeper into the forest beyond the old fence line, the mood became palpably tense. Each step further from the known trails felt like a descent into a place not meant to be reclaimed. Frost hung low over the undergrowth, and the air had taken on a bitter sharpness that clung to the lungs. Satellite communications was now fully down. GPS signals flickered in and out, then stopped completely. Still, they pressed on toward the coordinates marked Shelter. On the 4th day, a call came in from the Ridgefield Weather Station, one of the few automated outposts still functioning near the northern range of the old military zone. A junior technician named Harold Linwood, who had been reviewing audio logs for a separate environmental report, had stumbled across something deeply unsettling, an unclassified audio spike logged precisely at 2:13 a.m. on the night the group vanished. The recording, captured by a wind sensor's sub-frequency detector, began with a low hum that rapidly built into a prolonged guttural roar lasting approximately 47 seconds. It did not match any known storm pattern, avalanche signature, or animal profile in the database. It was mechanical, but organic, like a jet engine crossed with a lion's scream, then just. He logged the data, time-stamped it, and filed it under routine anomaly. The following morning, the file was missing. Not corrupted, not archived, deleted. The backup server that mirrored all weather logs within a 72-hour window was also blank. When he inquired with upper management, he received no reply, only a formal suspension notice citing procedural violation of data handling protocols. That same day, 2 agents visited his home. One claimed to be with the Bureau of Meteorology, the other refused to show ID. Meanwhile, back in the field, the team finally reached a narrow valley choked with overgrowth. Hidden beneath a thicket of wild blackberry and snow-matted pine needles, one of the rangers spotted an anomaly, freshly disturbed earth. The pattern was odd, not quite a shallow grave, not a natural depression, just a patch of ground that seemed wrong. They began clearing the brush carefully. They uncovered a body, cold, pale, curled in a fetal position with fingers clawed into the dirt as if trying to burrow through it. It was Riley Monroe. Identification was immediate due to the bracelet still clinging to his wrist. 5 beads, each etched with a friend's initials. He'd worn it since high school. But what horrified the team wasn't the position or even the facial expression frozen in a final gasp. It was his hands. The skin had begun to detach in sheets. Not decomposition, not natural decay. This was chemical. His fingertips had eroded as though he had dipped them repeatedly in acid. The skin along his forearms had bubbled and burst, but oddly, only on the surface. No deep tissue damage. The pattern suggested brief but intense exposure to a corrosive vapor, something airborne and targeted. His clothing, a hoodie and jeans, remained intact except for blackened patches near the sleeves. One boot was missing. Forensics, when brought in later by helicopter, found traces of ethylene dichloride, a banned industrial solvent once used in rocket fuel testing and decontamination procedures at military sites. Its manufacture had ceased in the late 80s, but caches still existed in classified stockpiles. Exposure in open environments was rare and certainly lethal in high concentration. The question burned like ice through the team. What was Riley doing near such a substance? And more importantly, how had he come in contact with it in a forest with no current industry? His body was lifted by stretcher. In his front pocket they found a piece of notebook paper soaked nearly through. The writing was smudged, but one phrase could still be made out. "Don't breathe. Light turns green." Investigators puzzled over it. What light? What green? And why was it important enough to be scrawled in haste, hidden away, and carried even in death? News of the discovery was suppressed from public release. Only family and high-level officials were informed. Authorities feared mass panic or interference from thrill-seeking amateur sleuths. But the leak was inevitable. Within 2 days, an anonymous whistleblower published details on a dark web forum frequented by ex-military personnel and conspiracy theorists. Photos of Riley's body, taken during recovery, were shared. One image showed the distinct burn pattern on his right hand in the shape of a starburst, an unusual symmetry that suggested not randomness, but design. Parallel to this, a field operative examining old Ridgefield logs uncovered a file that shouldn't have existed. Dated 1985, it referenced trial locust echo, exclamatic affection, and cognitive response under duress. The document noted Phase 3 as being incalculous due to unanticipated subject deterioration within 3 km of dispersal epicenter. The site listed, shelter. Tension spiked at the command center. A debate broke out. Should the search team be pulled out? Was this now a contamination zone? Were the rest of the missing already dead, or worse, transformed? No consensus was reached. The lead coordinator, Catherine Dolan, decided the mission would continue. But precautions would double. Hazmat suits issued, breathing monitors installed, and a strict buddy system enforced. The team split into 2 groups, one to transport Riley's remains out of the valley, and the other to advance toward the shelter coordinates, now only 2 miles ahead. That night, as the group hiked quietly under a cloud-blanketed moon, one of the tech specialists monitoring the handheld radiation sensor froze. "We're spiking," he whispered. "Right now, right here." The team stopped. The sensor peeped again. Ben went dead. No light, no tone, just silence. A wind passed through the trees, sharp, deliberate, and somewhere in that dark, something shifted underfoot. The trees thinned as the team approached what the map had called Shelter Seal. The path had turned from wild terrain into something unnaturally orderly. Branches had been cleared, soil flattened, and small stone markers led the way like breadcrumbs from a forgotten era. Then they saw it, a single rusted military tent structure, camouflaged and half-turned under decades of debris. From a distance, it looked like part of the forest floor. Up close, it smelled of mildew, stale air, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. The door, if it could be called that, was a reinforced flap sealed shut with wire hooks and a rusted padlock. Strangely, the lock wasn't broken. It had been snapped off deliberately and discarded several feet away. The flap, however, had been resecured from the outside, as if someone had left and wanted no one to follow. When they unlatched it and stepped inside, the silence was total. No wind, no rustling, just dead air pressing in from all sides. The interior was shockingly intact. The floor was covered in woven insulation, the corners lined with crumpled documents and aged rations. A fold-out cot sat against the far wall, and on it, beneath layers of carefully tucked army blankets, lay Jonas Liu. He had been dead for weeks, perhaps longer, but his body had not rotted in the usual way. The cold and the sealed environment had preserved him in a state somewhere between sleep and decay. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly parted, as if he had died mid-whisper. What chilled the team the most wasn't the body, it was the way he had been cared for. Someone had taken the time to clean his face, wrap him tightly, and position his hands over his chest, like a figure at a funeral. At his feet, someone had laid a canteen, sealed and full, and an unopened protein bar. On the floor beside the cot, a burnt-out lantern rested next to a pair of boots, one belonging to Jonas, the other not. Forensics noted no defensive wounds, no sign of trauma. He had likely died from exposure or starvation, despite the available supplies. His fingernails were short and clean. His beard had grown out slightly, but not enough to suggest he'd been alone for months. Most disturbing of all, the heater in the corner, an old propane unit, was full and functional. He could have survived, but he hadn't. which meant he had either chosen not to use it or someone had told him not to. Under the cot, one of the team's techs retrieved an old handheld cassette recorder. It had no batteries. When they inserted fresh ones and pressed play, nothing happened. They shook it, tried rewinding, still silence. But as one tech opened the compartment to clean the heads, the tape began to turn on its own. Slowly, with a grinding whine, the magnetic strip crawled across the reels, and then a voice spoke, barely above a breath, so low it had to be amplified several times over. "Don't trust Eli." Pause. Click. "Don't trust Eli." Click. Again and again, the same raspy whisper repeated. No variation in tone, no explanation, just that same fragmented warning. "Don't trust Eli." The voice was hard to place, old, maybe male, possibly Jonas himself, but distorted, as if spoken under duress or sedation. The team was shaken. Eli Thatcher had been one of the last seen with Jonas. They'd sat together in the SUV, shared snacks at the gas station, even exchanged messages the day before they vanished. Eli was the only one not yet found, and now there was a recording, hidden beneath the corpse of a friend, warning against him by name. The data was transmitted back to base via a temporary POF link. The FBI, already following the case closely, demanded immediate lockdown on information. No leaks, no media, no contact with families. Internal teams were instructed to recompile Eli's psychological file, red flagging any history of manipulation or violence. A secondary scan of the shelter revealed additional peculiarities. Scratches on the inner walls, but only near the lower edges, as if made by someone crawling or dragging themselves. Several notes were carved into the wooden beam above the cot, words etched hastily with a knife or sharp rock. "Light hums at 3. The green blink means stay quiet. Food poisoned? He watches." The shelter had clearly been used in the past, but not recently. Mice droppings were minimal. Dust settled evenly across most surfaces, but a patch near the door, scuff marks, layered footprints, even a blood smear, suggested someone had entered, stayed briefly, then locked the door from the outside. Jonas, it seemed, had not died alone. Someone had kept him alive, watched him, perhaps even spoken to him, until they decided to leave and shut him in. When Jonas's body was airlifted out the following afternoon, his limbs stiffened oddly in mid-transport. Autopsy later revealed a minor neurotoxin in his system, one historically tied to sleep cycle disruption and compliance behavior. Testing. The compound was traced back to experimental applications during Ridgefield's final days in operation. The existence of the drug was never publicly acknowledged. As the search unit regrouped outside the shelter, one of the team, Officer Callie Rook, found herself drawn to a nearby mound of dirt. No reason, just an instinct. She brushed away the frost and leaves, revealing a buried piece of glass. She dug with gloved hands. A frame emerged, then a photo. A group photo of the 5 boys, their faces smiling, except someone had scratched a large X over Jonas's head and circled Eli's 3 times in black marker. The mood around base camp had shifted from tension to dread. The photo with Jonas's scratched face and Eli's circled head was enough to make everyone question every theory they'd formed up to that point. The whispers from the tape haunted their sleep, and the discovery of Jonas's oddly preserved body had shattered any hope that this was a simple case of survival gone wrong. Still, there was one piece of the puzzle they hadn't found. Derek Shaw. He had always been the quiet one, slow to speak but quick to smile, and every time his name came up, the team felt the weight of knowing he might be suffering somewhere in those cold woods. On the 6th day of the mission, a drone equipped with infrared picked up a heat signature lodged between 2 ridge lines east of shelter and partially obscured by fallen timber and ice, but distinct enough to warrant a full dispatch. A secondary team was deployed under Sergeant Kamari Blake, who led a 5-person unit through an unmarked path traced via thermal overlay. The climb was steep, the terrain jagged, and the temperature continued to drop with every step upward. Near the edge of the cliff face, tangled in a nest of roots and partially buried by snowfall, they found him, Derek. He was wedged in a natural crevice, his body curled tightly against itself like a fetus, arms cradled to his chest. His skin had taken on a bluish tint from exposure, but there was no visible blood, no fractures, no sign of defensive wounds or a fall. His eyes were closed and his expression almost peaceful, as if he had simply fallen asleep. But when the medical team ran an initial toxicology scan on site, the results turned the discovery into another layer of nightmare. Derek's system was laced with traces of a compound called VTX-15, a highly restricted neurotoxin designed for chemical suppression. Its effects included muscular paralysis, cognitive suppression, and, in higher doses, cardiac arrest. It was originally developed in the early 90s for battlefield control under classified military research and discontinued after internal trials caused fatal reactions in primates. It had no business existing in this forest, let alone in Derek's bloodstream. The most disturbing part was the delivery. There were no injection marks, no oral ingestion signs. The toxin appeared to have been absorbed transdermally through the skin. It had entered his system slowly, indicating prolonged exposure, perhaps over hours. His fingernails were clean, no sign of struggle. The only irregularity was a faint set of bruises on his upper arm that resembled fingerprints, wide-set and oddly elongated, as though gripped by hands larger than normal. A makeshift satchel lay beside him, stitched from jacket lining and twine. Inside it was a pocket knife, 2 granola wrappers, and a torn piece of cloth bearing the corner of a government-issued hazard sign. Back at Shelter C, a follow-up inspection was ordered after Jonas's body had been removed. It wasn't just the etchings or the cassette that drew suspicion. It was what had been left behind, almost too deliberately. In the storage crate near the far wall, partially buried under a collapsed heater casing, a member of the retrieval crew found a pair of boots. One was labeled Thatcher. The other bore the initials E.F. Ali's boots. Both laces were intact. The soles were dusty but dry, not worn from recent use. But there was no body, no blood, no sign of forced entry or conflict. Just his boots, positioned side by side as if removed voluntarily. Investigators were stunned. If Eli had taken off his boots, what was he wearing when he left? And more urgently, how had he gotten out of the shelter if Jonas was found locked inside with no key and the flap wired shut from the outside? One theory emerged. Eli had left first, sealing Jonas in behind him. But to what end? Had he tried to protect him, imprison him, abandon him? Psychological analysis of Eli's past provided few answers. Diagnosed with mild bipolar disorder in his early 20s, Eli had been on medication and stable for several years. His records showed no history of violent behavior, but one therapist's note from 3 years prior stood out. Displays signs of compartmentalization under pressure, possibility of deep dissociative breaks in extreme isolation scenarios. It was speculative, but paired with Jonas's whispered warning, it no longer seemed far-fetched. The FBI reclassified the case from high-risk missing persons to active criminal investigation. Internal debate erupted. Was Eli now considered a suspect or a survivor? And if he was alive, why hadn't he sought help? More pressingly, if Jonas had feared him enough to leave a message in death, what exactly had Eli done in those woods? Agent Delaney Cruz, a behavioral analyst, was brought in to construct a timeline using all known data. She pointed to the pattern of the disappearances, the isolation of Riley, the entrapment of Jonas, and now Derek's silent death by toxin, as indicative of strategy, not chaos. Whoever orchestrated this knew their environment. They controlled the pace, the sequence, even the conditions of death. "It's not random, it's ritualized," she stated in a closed briefing. Yet, if Eli was the architect, he was also a ghost. No recent sightings, no forensics trails, not even a thermal blip. It was as though he had stepped out of time. But someone was moving through the forest. The team discovered makeshift traps, metal wire snares, camouflage nets, and disturbed paths meant to mislead, or slow trackers. They weren't new, but they were maintained, recently. Then came the audio. A backup communications tower on the eastern ridge picked up a signal, short, encrypted, barely audible. It repeated on a 3-minute loop for 6 hours. When decoded, it contained a single message embedded in a series of low-frequency hums. "He's not the same anymore. Don't follow." No origin, no voice signature, just a warning. The same words appeared again, scratched into bark on a tree 2 miles from Derek's body. Below it, another symbol, an eye with a vertical slash through it. The scratched symbol beneath the tree near Derek's body, an eye with a vertical slash, sent a ripple through the investigation team. Some interpreted it as a warning, others as a claim of surveillance, control. But one person recognized it immediately. Abigail Martin, Caleb's mother, who had been present at the base command for a formal briefing, turned pale the moment she saw the image projected on the digital board. She asked to speak privately with Agent Cruz. In the quiet of a supply tent, she unfolded a truth no one had expected. Years ago, when Eli Thatcher was 19, he had suffered what doctors called a reactive psychotic episode. At the time, he had been living with the Martins temporarily while recovering from family trauma. Shane remembered the long nights, Eli sitting awake in the living room staring at the wall, whispering phrases no one understood. He kept drawing circles filled with geometric lines and scribbling one phrase again and again into his notebooks. The light will guide the reborn. One night, Caleb found him outside, barefoot, walking in circles under the streetlight, murmuring, "The world is a simulation in decay. I am the conduit to renewal." Caleb had taken him inside, calmed him down, never told their other friends. Eli was institutionalized for a month, put on a stabilizing regimen, and eventually released with therapy and medication. The doctors labeled it a stress-induced breakdown, tied to grief and unresolved trauma from his father's death. But Abigail was never sure. She kept one of Eli's journals from that time, a collection of thoughts, dreams, and strange diagrams that bore eerie resemblance to the symbol found near Derek's body. On the final page, Eli had written something she'd never understood until now. The eyes must close before the new world sees. When this information was presented to the FBI, it reframed Eli not just as a missing person, but as a potential visionary or a deluded manipulator. The investigation now had to ask, had Eli relapsed? Had the forest, the isolation, triggered a return to that fractured state of mind? And, more dangerously, had he drawn the others into it? While this revelation sent one branch of the investigation spiraling, another clue emerged from a digital forensic sweep of Jonas Liu's email history. One draft stood out. It had never been sent. Timestamped 2 days before the disappearance, it was addressed to Reverend Thomas Chalmers, Chalmers's spiritual mentor. The subject line simply read, "Contingency." The message itself was short, almost a whisper in digital ink. "If we don't make it back, please check Ridgeview Plant B. I think someone knows what's still down there. If I'm wrong, forgive me. If I'm right." The Ridgeview chemical processing plant had been shut down since 1983 after a Class 4 contamination event. Officially, it was neutralized, decommissioned, and sealed. Unofficially, there were rumors that the facility had been repurposed for experimental neurological conditioning trials under the RSD program. Its proximity to Shelter C, less than 10 miles southeast, raised immediate red flags. Why would Jonas mention it? And what did he believe was still down there? The team cross-referenced Jonas's church attendance, private sessions, and confession notes. Reverend Chalmers, contacted by federal agents, confirmed that Jonas had expressed growing concern about a friend's shift in demeanor. He never named Eli directly, but described someone becoming obsessed with light, rebirth, and something called the second resonance. Jonas had feared they were being drawn into a spiritual deception masked as truth, and mentioned visions Eli described, where the trees whispered coordinates and the rocks pulsed with memory. Chalmers hadn't taken it seriously. He assumed it was metaphor, spiritual anxiety. Now he realized Jonas had been trying to warn him. Investigators requested clearance to access Ridgeview Plant B. Initially denied, they escalated through internal security channels, finally obtaining a 48-hour window under full hazmat and ballistic protocols. A forward team was dispatched immediately. The facility, built into a limestone quarry, had long since disappeared beneath overgrowth and erosion. Its entryway, a reinforced blast door, was still intact, though rusted along its hinges. Entry was forced. Inside, a chill that defied the outside temperature swept through the team. Dust blanketed every surface, ceiling tiles sagged, but the air carried something else, a faint hum, steady and rhythmic, as if deep machinery had never fully shut down. What they found inside was not a typical abandoned facility. Portions had clearly been maintained, hallways swept, some rooms locked from within. In the central testing chamber, they discovered a single chair bolted to the floor, surrounded by rusted medical equipment. On the far wall, a phrase had been painted in black, uneven strokes. In a control room nearby, monitors flickered to life as auxiliary power reconnected. One screen showed a dated list of test subjects, coded alphanumeric tags, but one stood out, ET7X. The timestamp next to it matched the week the group vanished. An adjacent console played back a distorted security feed. 5 young men, blindfolded, being led single-foot toward the entrance tunnel. One figure at the rear walked unbound, head tilted toward the ceiling, hands outstretched, his posture almost serene. Eli. The footage of 5 blindfolded figures being led into Ridgeview Plant B had shocked the entire task force. It wasn't just confirmation that all the boys had been brought to the site. It was the undeniable revelation that Eli had not only walked in unrestrained, but had done so willingly. As the final frame froze on his upturned face, backlit by the flickering overhead lights, a chilling calm emanated from the image. Agent Delaney Cruz immediately ordered a full sweep of the facility beyond the central chamber. If Eli had been part of something deeper, perhaps he was still here, or what remained of him. Down a rusted service corridor marked Sector Theta, a reinforced hatch stood sealed by a keypad now rendered useless by decades of corrosion. Using portable cutting tools, the team breached the door, reached out to stage by emergency strips, still pulsing with residual energy. At the bottom, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath turned to mist. Walls became slick with condensation. The corridor turned left, then opened into a wide circular room surrounded by glass observation panels. At the center stood a vault, a massive cylindrical chamber lined with frosted steel and refrigerated conduits. Stenciled across its face were faded words, barely legible through the ice. Deep Cryogenic Unit, RSD Division. No one spoke as the unit hissed, a low release of pressurized air escaping like a final breath. On a nearby console, analog dials blinked erratically. One red light pulsed above a single chamber labeled Squire 07X. The lead technician, hands shaking, input manual override. The unit clicked, hissed, then began to part in slow mechanical groans. Inside, encased in layers of transparent polymer and emergency insulation, was a figure. Male, late 20s, tubes inserted through nose and arms, electrodrift attached to temples, oxygen mask intact. Heart rate 52 BPM, body temp artificially lowered to 34.5 DDC. Strable, it was Eli Thatcher. His face was thinner but unmistakable. His hair had grown out slightly. Small patches of skin along his arms bore the same faint starburst burn pattern seen on Riley, though less severe. A data log embedded in the chamber base showed one date under induction, January 15th, the night the group disappeared. No record of exit. No explanation for his placement. Just a system loop confirming continuous support and a cryptic phrase blinking across the interface. Subject stabilized for Phase 2. The team scrambled to document every detail. Photos, samples, system backups. They lifted Eli carefully, fearing the effects of abrupt temperature shift. As they transported him into a medical evac unit, they noted something even stranger. No IV insertion scars, no bed sores, no sign that he had been unconscious for months. His body was lean, hydrated, maintained, monitored, almost nurtured. A scan of the room revealed more. Along the walls, file cabinets sealed with magnetic locks held classified folders. Most were too degraded to recover, but a few remained legible. One was titled, Lux Gateway, Subjective Neural Reframing. The content outlined a project designed to simulate extended states of consciousness under controlled neurological conditioning, essentially creating false realities for study in isolated environments. The method? Sleep stimulus that overlay an environmental control and targeted memory reframing. Voluntary subjects were placed into low-level temperature dormancy while fed programmed visual and emotional stimuli through cranial implants. The goal? Rewire perception, rewire belief, rebuild human response to fear, trust, and control. One footnote read, candidates displaying spiritual psychosis tendencies show higher integration rate. Next to it, ES7. Back at command, Eli was placed into a controlled recovery unit. His vital signs remained stable. Doctors were baffled. No signs of coma trauma, no neural degradation. He should have awoken instantly, but he remained inert, eyes flickering beneath closed lids, as if trapped in a dream he couldn't escape. However, EEG readouts spiked whenever the word light was spoken near him. Each time, brain activity surged, then flatlined into baseline silence again. Whatever Phase 2 was, Eli had not left it yet. A second file, retrieved from the lab, was even more damning. Dated 2 weeks before the group vanished, it contained a scanned consent form with Eli's signature, except the print line at the bottom listed his emergency contact as Caleb Martin. The implications were staggering. Had Caleb known? Was he complicit? Or had someone forged the document to legitimize Eli's inclusion? Crews presented the findings to Abigail Martin. She wept silently, whispering that Caleb would never do such a thing, but when asked if Eli could have convinced him, she paused. Eli believed he was chosen, she finally admitted. He told Caleb once that he could reset broken minds with his dreams. She had thought it was poetic nonsense. Now it seemed more like a manifesto. Medical staff discovered something else, a small device embedded behind Eli's right ear beneath the skin. It resembled a cranial stimulator, but was unlike any model used in contemporary therapy. It pulsed with residual current. When removed, it triggered a brief muscle spasm in Eli's fingers. Then his lips moved. Not a full word, just one syllable, barely audible. Jonah, the whispered name, Jonas, from Eli's barely functioning lips sent an immediate ripple through the command center. Neurologists gathered around the medical bay trying to prompt further vocalization, but Eli returned to his previous unresponsive state, locked in a rhythmic sleep with occasional involuntary twitches. While his body was at rest, the investigation was anything but. The recovery team, having now secured multiple physical files and databanks from Ridgeview Plant B, had begun the arduous process of decoding nearly 3 decades of encrypted logs. Among them, they found a weathered hard drive labeled Omega Root/Subject of Phase Deployment 1993/Revival Contingency V2.7. Its casing marked with the same /OI symbol. The data inside, once decrypted through legacy OS emulation, contained hundreds of records, some video, some audio, most marked classified, containment level 6. But one folder stood out. Its title, Val5/Youth/Gateway Autumn. The first document in the folder was a detailed psychological intake profile of 5 young men: Caleb Martin, Derek Shaw, Jonas Liu, Riley Monroe, and Eli Thatcher, under a code named project titled Neurological Reintegration Through Controlled Isolation. In bureaucratic language, the document explained that the participants had been voluntarily integrated into a social experiment intended to simulate psychological degradation and adaptation under high-stress wilderness scenario. The goal was to observe shifts in behavior, empathy, logic, and panic when individuals with varying cognitive baselines were placed in an increasingly destabilized environment. But the problem was clear. None of the group, except Eli, had ever agreed to such a study. The consent forms were forged, digital entries overwritten. The metadata on Jonas's file revealed it had been copied and altered less than 24 hours before their disappearance. He, however, had signed everything. Further documents revealed Eli had been recruited months in advance through a dormant RSD liaison program. His personal therapy sessions had been monitored, his brain scans analyzed. The slippage in his mental state wasn't just documented, it was exploited. In exchange for his participation, Eli had been promised closure, truth, and clarity. A cleaner mind, a reborn self. He had become the anchor for a renewed version of the Lux Gateway Initiative, one that sought not only to understand emotional breakdown, but to harness and reprogram it. Video footage dated January 14th, the night before the basketball game, showed Eli in an interview chamber speaking calmly with 2 unidentified figures in lab coats. "They trust me," he said. "They'll follow if I ask." One of the scientists asked, "Are you willing to lose them?" Eli paused for a long moment. "If it means they'll understand, then yes." The next clip showed him standing at a whiteboard, mapping out a route through the Valemont Ridge, complete with coded symbols and trigger points. He had planned every step: the stop at the gas station, the detour onto the Ridge Road, the decision to abandon the SUV. He believed, or had been convinced, that doing so would opened the eyes of his friends, forcing them to confront truths buried under the routine of daily life. He was instructed not to intervene once the trial began. One log entry outlined the role of neurochemicals administered in secret. At some point during the drive, the boys were exposed to an aerosolized form of VTX-15, initially in microdose. Designed to increase suggestibility and suppress immediate memory retention, it ensured they would be disoriented enough to accept the scenario being presented without full awareness. It was Riley who succumbed first, his panic unanticipated. The log's note, Subject R displayed advanced breakdown, proceeded to unauthorized escape, terminated naturally via environmental hazard. Derek's death was listed clinically as result of prolonged compound saturation plus environmental exposure. Jonas had made it to Shelter C, but deviated from the script by barricading himself instead of complying with containment protocol. His death was marked non-compliant cessation. The experiment was never supposed to go this far. A secondary file titled Subsetic ET7X detailed the final phase. Once the group's integrity collapsed, Eli was extracted, sedated, and placed into the cryochamber to simulate long-term isolation and hallucination. Over the next several weeks, his subconscious was bombarded with layered dreams, scenes of his friends, symbolic pain loops, cyclical failures of trust, and imposed guilt. Every spike in his neurological response was recorded. One entry read, Subject's spiritual framework repurposed to drive compliance through internalized redemption arc. Another file included fragments of audio generated from Eli's induced REM cycles. In one, he mumbled repeatedly, I didn't mean to bring them. Back at the command center, a technician discovered something else embedded deep within the drive's code. A kill command set to activate remotely in the event of external breach. Had the team not recovered the data manually, it would have been wiped the moment base operations reconnected to federal servers. Someone, somewhere, still had access. Agent Cruz briefed the core team. We now have proof that what happened wasn't an accident. It wasn't wilderness confusion. This was a trial, and these boys were test subjects. All except one, Eli. He was both participant and instrument. Whether willingly or not, he became their shepherd into trauma. The revelation fractured morale. Some demanded immediate release of the findings to the public. Others feared the political consequences, the lawsuits, the collapse of long-buried departments tied to defense research. But Cruz had another concern. If Eli's mind had truly been fractured, rebuilt, and fractured again under synthetic stimuli, who exactly was he now? What did he remember? And if he woke up, what part of him would rise? The fallout began before the report was even finished. As investigators and forensic analysts scrambled to consolidate their findings into a formal briefing, someone, an anonymous figure within the chain of command, intercepted the internal server and copied the unredacted Lux Gateway files. Less than 72 hours later, a small manila envelope arrived at the Martin family residence, postmarked from Denver, untraceable. Inside were 15 pages of black and white printouts, summaries of the experiment, neurological graphs, footage stills, and most damning of all, a signature page with Caleb's name misted under secondary observer, forged in sharp clinical strokes. Abigail Martin collapsed at the sight. She knew Caleb would never have participated, and yet his name, his handwriting, stolen and weaponized, was now etched into the heart of this tragedy. She called Agent Cruz directly, her voice flat with grief. You said Eli was sick, but someone else was sicker. Within days, mainstream media caught wind of the cover-up. A leak, undoubtedly from the same insider, sent files to 4 independent investigative outlets. The headlines exploded. Secret military experiment ends in death. Young men used as guinea pigs. Cryogenics found in abandoned chemical lab. Congressional hearings were threatened. Legal teams formed. The Department of Defense denied any active connection, claiming the program had been terminated and classified beyond its scope. But the evidence was undeniable. The Ridgeview plant had been reactivated. Personnel had entered and exited under Black Bar, and a medical team had been assigned to monitor one remaining subject, Eli Thatcher. While chaos unfolded outside, Eli's body finally began to stir. Doctors noted rapid eye movement increasing in frequency, neural activity oscillating between delta and beta waves. Then, on the 14th day of observation, he woke. It wasn't dramatic, no flailing, just a quiet inhalation as his eyes opened slowly to the fluorescent lights above him. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then whispered, "Is it over?" The nurses froze. Medical leads rushed in. Eli sat up without resistance. He asked for water. When offered, he held the cup with both hands, like a child relearning motion. He didn't speak again for hours, not until Cruz entered the room, sat down beside him, and asked a single question. "Do you remember what happened?" He looked down at his fingers, flexed them, then slowly nodded. "Some of it," he said, his voice hoarse. "Not the woods. Not all. But before," he paused. "There was a room. They said I was helping. That it was a test. They said if I did this, I could see them again, the way they were before they changed." Cruz leaned in. "Did you know they'd die?" Eli turned his head, eyes suddenly clear. "No," he said. "I thought it was a game. I thought they'd wake up too." He trembled. "I didn't know I'd kill them." The confession was recorded, sealed, and immediately contested by legal counsel appointed to him under emergency psychiatric guardianship. Eli was transferred to a secure rehabilitation facility under constant observation. A psychological profile noted fractured moral cognition, residual trauma layer, and guilt-fueled dissociative disorder. Whether he was criminally liable remained in limbo. The official report concluded that he had operated under manipulated intent with incomplete comprehension. Public opinion split. Some called him a victim, others a traitor. Funerals were held across 3 states. Riley, Jonas, Derek, and Caleb honored as innocents drawn into a darkness they never chose. Abigail Martin delivered a eulogy not about Caleb's death, but about his capacity to love unconditionally. He followed Eli, she said, because he believed in healing. He believed Eli had already been taken. Months later, a Senate subcommittee concluded its investigation with recommendations for stricter oversight on legacy defense projects, but no arrests were made. The Ridgeview site was ordered destroyed, though conspiracy theorists claim demolition teams never entered. The slashed eyes symbol began appearing on forums, graffitied walls, even tattoos adopted by those who believed the experiment was still active somewhere else, evolving. Eli's final public words came during a closed psychiatric evaluation 6 months after his awakening. Asked what he remembered most vividly, he answered, "There was light. It kept flickering. Every time it flashed, I saw their faces again, not angry, not scared, just waiting." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes I shall hear why." If this story struck a chord with you, take a moment to subscribe and stay connected. We uncover dark truths like this every week. What part of the mystery hit you hardest? Was it Eli's final words, the forgotten lab, or the betrayal buried in silence? And while you're here, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Let's keep this conversation alive, because sometimes the truth only comes to light when enough people are looking.